Welcome to Life Chapters Money Choices, the podcast where we look at the big transitions in life, the financial decisions that come with them, and the conversations that families often leave far too late. Today's episode takes us into probably one of the most difficult later life chapters, dementia. And it's a word that carries enormous emotional weight. I think for many families, it almost begins unnoticed. Maybe a missed appointment, a misplaced set of keys. We all misplace our keys. Maybe it's just a strange lapse in judgment that you say, well, we're getting older. And then over time, it can become one of the most complex intersections here of healthcare, of money, of family responsibility, of legal planning and dignity, because dementia really changes the very architecture of a family. It affects who makes the decisions, who pays for your care, who becomes the caregiver, who feels guilty, who feels overwhelmed. And to all of us, I think we kind of hope that'll never happen to us, but the risks are increasing as we live longer. I think that is certainly what the research is telling us. So to help us navigate this with a bit of compassion and clarity, I'm joined by Dr. Ryan Fuller, specialist geriatric psychiatrist and founder of the Memory Care Group. Ryan works with older patients with complex mental health conditions, including dementia, using very evidence-based approaches within family systems, and as always by Kim Potgieter of Chartered Wealth as well. So Ryan, it's great to have you in the studio, and very difficult conversation. It was interesting when Yanni Mouton wrote a letter to shareholders first coming out with his early dementia, how it changed their conversation in boardrooms. But we're taking this into the family, and I think it's a word many people use very loosely. So maybe just from a clinical perspective, when we talk about dementia, what exactly is dementia?
Firstly, thank you very much for raising this awareness. We desperately need more platforms like this. It's a real pleasure to meet you, and thank you, Kim, for the opportunity. It's a fantastic introduction. You've already hit many of the main areas that we live with day to day, trying to help people with memory challenges. As you said, dementia is a bit like a word cancer. It's extremely emotive. And part of our work is how to demystify that and then work with what we call pre- and post-diagnostic counseling, no different to oncology or cancer. And yes, it's right to try and hit it on the head. So what we mean by dementia is chronic brain failure, as opposed to acute brain failure, which would be delirium or a confusional state. If, for example, someone got hit on the head, or they had a malaria or any infective cause, there's a long sort of shopping list of causes where the brain, like any organ, can misfire, not function properly. And hopefully with delirium, you would then get through that. But delirium is a medical emergency. The mortality rate's up to 10%, like a heart attack. It's a very serious condition. Dementia is chronic brain failure, meaning it's not an acute-lived short episode of a week or a month. It's typically over a couple of years. And ultimately, what most people, I think, intuitively know, it's progressive decline in brain function. We see it as memory, but there are also other functions in the brain with decision-making, behaviour, emotional responses. In fact, as a psychiatrist, most of my work is what we call non-cognitive or challenging behaviour when it becomes a crisis. It's not just memory-related. About 50% of people with dementia syndrome will have this intense, challenging behavior through the course of the disease. And that we can maybe touch on a bit later in terms of how we manage that risk. And so the archetype or typical dementia syndrome, we call it a syndrome because there's no single cause. It's a group or collection of illnesses. Any condition that affects the brain can cause a dementia syndrome. And we have to look at function. So most people would understand heart failure. The body's pump is now declining, and there are consequences of that. And you can see the heart. There are nice pictures of it, and intuitively you'll understand it. Whereas the brain is a bit of a mush. It's just a collection of grey matter, hopefully, and difficult to conceptualize how the brain actually functions. If there's a decline in brain function over a time period, we would then say, well, then what's causing that? And most people have understood Alzheimer's disease is the commonest type of a dementia syndrome. Probably 70 to 80% of all dementias are caused by Alzheimer's. There are other types of dementias. We see a lot of vascular dementia, as well as frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's-related dementia, alcohol-related dementia, and then the more rarer ones that we don't tend to see. They're more prevalent in Europe, sort of mad cow disease, if you like. We don't see too many of those, thankfully. So any condition where the brain is struggling to get rid of this infective or inflammatory response can cause a dementia syndrome. Unfortunately, we don't know what causes Alzheimer's disease. We have a lot of evidence that it's caused by an amyloid buildup of a toxic protein that's normally in the brain. And there's lots of research about how this toxic protein can be cleared by the brain. But even that strategy that, the US has invested billions into it, and Europe as well, hasn't really produced any disease-modifying treatments, unfortunately. That's not to say we don't have options for treatment. We can get into some of what we do to slow down memory loss and how we identify it. But the dementia itself, I guess there's another way of thinking about it, is psychosocial incompetency, that people struggle to manage and make decisions in their life, in the social space and psychologically. And that was one of the original definitions of dementia from the Germans, that if a person wasn't competent in their later life years, there was a legal requirement to help this person be safe, that they don't make financial decisions and be exploited, that people don't take advantage of them. And so as you said very, very accurately, it's one of the conditions in medicine that has a very, very strong medico-legal component. So all the patients we see a social worker, for example, to protect their rights. There's an occupational therapist. There's a team-based approach. And as a psychiatrist, I have to work with neurologists, geriatricians as well. I'm not a physician in that regard. As you said, we have to exclude medical conditions that can impact the brain function. So there's a lot to talk about. I guess
it's a great start in trying to summarize such a complex syndrome, as you said, in a nutshell. And Kim, it reminds me of a conversation from the medico-legal side that we had around the power of attorney,
yes,
which exactly. I'm sure we'll come to. Just to stay with you for a while longer, Ryan, how do you distinguish here between so-called normal aging, the familiar, I walked into the room and, I forgot what I was going to do here, versus something that should prompt concern? Are there signs, are there red flags that an individual or a family member might be able to look for to say, right, maybe this requires further treatment, observation, a visit to the doctor?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely correct. There's age-appropriate cognitive decline. If the brain is a car, your Ferrari is going to slow down in terms of mental processing, but it doesn't always break down. We tend to say, that cognitive processing speed, or mentation is a word, although that slows down, it gets replaced, hopefully, at the same rate as wisdom, that you begin to understand how to make decisions based on your life experiences. So I don't know, there's some research that shows the fastest your brain will operate is at the age of about 20 years old. And then it's a slow, steady decline from there. And if you're not depressed now, you soon will be. No, but what you compensate with is wisdom and life experience. And so it's not all demoralizing. The Alzheimer's Association, I think in the US, have got a nice sort of 4-question checklist, which makes sense. And it's really a functional description, as you said. So if you are misplacing personal items, that doesn't mean you've necessarily got dementia. These 4 questions, and you need all 4 to be at the same time, and you can't just cherry pick 1 or 2. And the one is, are you a little bit confused or disorientated with the date and time most of the time? So if I don't know the date exactly today, it's not the end of the world, but I'll more or less know it's winter. Hopefully I'll know it's June. It is June, right? And it's 2026, and then I'm in Joburg. Okay, and if that happens several times a week, then that might be a little bit of concern, especially if I'm still working, because I should know more or less the date. Bearing in mind that a lot of our patients are retired, so they don't need to know the date necessarily, because there's that discussion as well. So disorientation for date, repetitiveness, asking repetitive questions or telling repetitive stories within the family to different family members can be a sign. Getting lost when driving with direction finding. And then critically, exactly for this topic, is difficulty managing finances. So it's the disorientation to time and place, repetitive questions, direction-finding problems, and financial decision-making. If you've got all four, there might be, and this is important to say, there might be a problem.
Yeah.
Because actually, it's important to say the commonest thing I see, actually, aside from Alzheimer's, is depression. And late life crises, we can talk a lot about an existential crisis. So as a psychiatrist, a lot of it's about loss and grief. And we typically find when people are retiring, there's a grief process. There's a mourning of the one's career that isn't easily attended to.
Yeah.
And that can manifest as almost indistinguishable from a dementia syndrome. We can loosely say that manifests as depression, anxiety. And if we treat the depression, anxiety, if we help someone find purpose and meaning, bring structure to their life, we do see improvements in memory function. The problem is often if that goes unchecked, that is a risk factor in itself for dementia. Depression, existential angst, and then social isolation. So we're talking about a condition within the brain, within the body, in the mind, if you like, and there's ways we have to attend to that first. But then outside the body, the social context is very, very important. So, and the obvious thing is isolation, etc. So, excuse me. I think it's important to try and keep things in perspective.
Yeah.
And not, that's what I wanted to say.
But it's fascinating, Kim, that so often you speak about being intentional about the transition from being employed. And that's often a core part of our identity. If you're a senior executive, CEO in an organization, to all of a sudden overnight losing what was really the primary self-identity that you had, and now you lose that. And with that, if there isn't a managed transition, one can slip into this kind of depression. And it's fascinating to see the interplay there as well. Just take me back from what you see having this conversation with your clients. And it's one of those topics that I think families often avoid because it feels frightening. It feels maybe final, very emotionally loaded. From your perspective, why do families struggle to start these conversations early? And do you think we're avoiding this because of the fear of what it may mean financially and practically?
I'm not sure it's just because of what it means financially and practically. I find people avoid the conversation more from a respect of each other point of view. So we see many couples where one of the partners have got early stage dementia. And when we bring it up for the first time, it's some of the most difficult conversations we ever have. I always say to you, money's that taboo topic. But when we're bringing up this topic of, we've noticed, because what Dr. Fuller just mentioned about the financial part, we start seeing it happening because we start talking about what investments they need to go into. And then you notice this risk. They're so risk adverse. Then we're talking about like simple things of how the calculations are going to work. And we pick up how they can't relate. And then the next meeting they come in and they repeat themselves. And then the next meeting they come back and they repeat themselves. So now, think about our role. Who do we go to? Do we go to the person that's repeating themselves? Do we ask the spouse? Do we do it in front of each other? On top of that, sometimes they come in on their own and their children might have emigrated or something. Now do we legally should not pick up the phone to phone the children overseas. So we sit in many situations, I work with the planners, where we are concerned. We know something's happening. But for us to bring it up, we've got to really have a process of doing it so we don't offend it. So I've had people in meetings where we've brought it up gently and they've said, well, they're going to leave us. If that's the way we're going to be, they're going to leave us. Now, if they leave us, we know that they are now open to being taken total advantage of by somebody else.
Yeah.
So there is so many layers to this, Michael.
Do you, given that experience, when you sit down with clients who may be a little younger and less at risk early on, have that conversation to say, listen, we want to be your planner for the next 30, 40 years. So if we pick anything up later on in life, that you give us the permission to be able to approach another family member. How does one start to structure this thing?
I think it's a great idea, and maybe Dr. Fuller can add to it, because I think if we could have something in our document that we give people and say, when we pick it up, I always use it as a reason as to why you need a planner, because many people we meet, they're very good at running their own money. They're phenomenal at their investing, all of that. And I go, but what when you're not? How will you know? Who will be watching you? Who will be your partner in it? So the conversation is coming up earlier, but never anything documented that we would do it. It's more like a trust.
Yeah. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the privilege of working in the UK, where they've been wrestling with this in Europe for a much longer time. So they have a specific Mental Capacity Act, it's called. We don't have that in South Africa. What is that? That is a legal requirement where there are any concerns from, exactly as Kim says, whether it's the spouse, family, any professional, not just medical professional, financial advisors, are legally obligated to raise concerns in a structured way where, again, we have specific training under the Mental Capacity Act of how to approach the problem with dignity, with respect, because you're dealing with many complex issues that interplay, not just financial exploitation. There's also, we generally call it safeguarding as an overall concept, where financial exploitation is within safeguarding. There's also sort of basic things of whether a person is competent to take their medication, for example. So, of course, if you have decline in one area, this is how we make the diagnosis of dementia as well. It's a functional decline in multiple areas, not just financial management. It's driving a car, taking your medication, understanding how to navigate your environment, getting to a doctor's appointment, etc. So there are health and safety risks to this as well as financial risks. And the Mental Capacity Act's purpose is to do a capacity assessment, not a physical assessment, not a mental state assessment or a memory assessment. It's a capacity assessment. What is that? It's, can this human being make relevant decisions in their own best interests? And in their system, just to explain, it's not just a doctor that does the capacity assessment. It could be any healthcare professional who's trained in it, because there are not enough doctors to do it, basically. So the social worker, community nurse, and various people. And then they break up capacity into higher stakes decision-making, such as managing finances, deciding where to live, making medical decisions of having an operation or being admitted or not, driving a motor car, owning a firearm. These are high complex decision making, and lower stakes decisions, so managing your life, what to wear, what to eat. And if there are capacity concerns, there's a structured mechanism that is gone through. So there's at least 2 doctors, a social worker, and an attorney. Because ultimately, at the end of that process, the person might be declared incompetent. Now, that's a massive step. In South Africa, we don't have that specific act, but we do have the Older Persons Act, which does cover a lot of this, but not in a structured way as much. And whether then a person needs administratorship or curatorship. And that's a very poorly understood process for most people, because they're not dealing with it every day. It's not a fun topic. It's complex. But in short, you raised power of attorney. If there are capacity concerns for someone, the power of attorney, for the listeners, is automatically invalid. There has to be a reversibility to a power of attorney. So if I allow you to manage my affairs, if God forbid something happened, if I'm incompetent and I don't remember I've given you the power of attorney, I'm now giving you a blank check, in effect. Yeah. Even if you're a family. And so the law says, which is correct, that no longer is acceptable. You then have to get administratorship, curatorship. Curatorship's expensive, requires an advocate. It takes a long time. Our courts are congested. So we, in practice, do a lot of administratorships, which doesn't cost any money. That's through the Master of the High Court. That just requires typically a psychiatrist, a medical assessment, a report, and a social worker report. And then the Master of the High Court has the discretion then to either refer for curatorship if it's a complex, wealthy estate or contested, or to grant the people applying for it administratorship rights. Now, this is important because this is a free process. Most of our country, don't have access to these resources in the courts. But the administrator's powers are to administer the funds. It's not really designed to administer other life decisions. So this is where there's a gap in the law. And there are many good movements who are trying to get the law updated, the Older Persons Act, basically. But that, like a lot of our legislation, is still sitting there. I just want to briefly go back to what you're saying with what we do when we have a patient where we have some concerns. There's some basic ethical principles which we have to attend to. These are not rules. The ethics are to guide us because every situation is different. And And the coming together of financial industry, medical industry, and yourself raising the awareness is so important, because we have to treat people with respect and act in their best interests, not in the interests of the family or the banks. So what is in the patient's best interest? We have to do the least restrictive thing. We mustn't just admit them to hospital and take away their rights.
Yeah.
We have to presume, this is important, that they have capacity until proven otherwise. So even if they're making terrible decisions, the presumption of capacity is important. And then we have to optimize the circumstances to enhance their capacity. We mustn't just put them in front of a doctor and fire questions at them. And for example, a common thing is hearing impairment. Someone's hearing's going, we must get them a hearing aid.
Yeah.
If they can't see, if they're depressed or stressed, we must help them be calmer. We must find time for them to engage. So we have patients with clear-cut Alzheimer's dementia who still have capacity. And because there's this assumption as well that just because you're dementing that you lose capacity. That's not always true. In the early stages, that's not true at all. And it is possible. You can see I talk a lot about this subject, so forgive me. But in the early stages of memory decline, exactly what you said, there's a living will in the UK that we don't have in South Africa. We can call it the letter of wishes you could do when you are competent.
Yes.
And you can draw up a crisis contingency plan, exactly what you said. That if
My daughter's asked me for one, just by the way.
Yeah.
She wants me to sign it.
But
she's clever.
I think it's eminently sensible. And while we're having this conversation, that while you are of absolute sound mind, and your 20-year-old might disagree, and as you say, they're at their peak, but you do have a little more growing wisdom, that you put something together that takes a lot of the painful decision making, the difficult decision making, and makes it a lot easier in the eventuality that this could happen. And the risks are increasing, aren't they, Doctor? I mean,
huge.
Given, are you seeing a rise because we're living longer? Do you think it's lifestyle? Is it multifactorial? What are you seeing out there?
So, I mean, the 2 points there. One is the prevalence, the amount of people living with dementia is increasing exactly because people are living longer. We have an increasing lifespan for lots of different reasons we won't go into. But the important and horrifying stat is that about 5% of people aged 65 anywhere on the planet will have Alzheimer's disease, not just dementia. Remember, Alzheimer's is the commonest type. 5% of people 65 and older. And the next data point is every 5 years that prevalence doubles. So by the age of 70, it's 10%, 75, 20. Age 80, it's 40%.
Wow.
So you're absolutely right that people are living longer, and the prevalence is we're seeing more people. Yes, and there's lots of work. It's called a silver tsunami. That the problem is that people are living too long for their retirement planning, and now what we see, unfortunately, in practice, is people in abject poverty who didn't plan to live this long or didn't know how to accumulate enough wealth not to live the life of Riley, just to simply have a home somewhere and to afford to live. So that is a major problem. The other thing I just want to raise is because of the technology and mobile phone, nearly every single patient we now see has been a victim of fraud using mobile technology. And we know in the banking sector that unfortunately their syndicates are often in institutions, that people get targeted by virtue of their age. And so they'll take all the customers and take the oldest customer who typically has accrued a bit of wealth and start targeting them. I don't even have to have dementia to be defrauded, because we had one case last week. A lady had a very civilized person phone her and say, you've been hacked. Don't worry, I've closed your account and I've opened new accounts at various other banks, and they sent them a screenshot of that.
Yeah.
So all you need to do is click on the one-time PIN. Fortunately, a daughter was with her and she didn't. And so there's a real need for senior online services, SOS. It's a terrible name, but that's the concept.
Yeah.
How do we help teach people of a certain age range how to engage sensibly with technology is not such an easy thing. Often the phones get lost, and linked to the phone is is identity theft and also real safety concerns of someone then driving and getting lost. And then how do we find them? So a lot of our work is how do we safeguard people's risk in general, and financial is one part of that. Yeah.
It's so scary. You could just see someone ticking off all ID numbers lower than 60 starts, and let's go and target those. With AI, you've got the ability.
I just got to add one happy story. I mean, we had a client the other day who in her 40s had some fraud, and her mom, who's a client of ours, pointed out to her that she was about to pay something that was fraudulent, because we're running all these talks on exactly what Dr. Fuller's talking about, just to help the clients. So she helped her daughter, and we were, you see how what we're doing is working.
Now, well, I'm glad to hear that. And I like the idea of having a specialist senior service online approach. And I think many corporates need to start thinking along those lines as well. It would be a fantastic value addition that I'm sure many would look at if you want to differentiate in a very competitive banking space.
You are giving the banking industry, but they all want us on our app and they don't want to talk to us anymore.
But that's, and I know there was a European bank, I think they're in Estonia of all places, who won an award for simply doing door knocking welfare checks. So the bank employed people, say Mrs., I went to an Estonian accent, how is she? And they go knock on the door to see, is she still alive? Because ladies live longer than men, it's typically ladies. And who's she living with? And it's a simple checklist. And then to say, well, do you know that you have a bank account? And do you know that you have a mobile phone? And in doing that, they cut down fraud enormously. Because now they're looking at welfare checks of their customer base. But as you say, it came from the bank, not from the healthcare sector.
Big opportunity there. Just as we wrap up and we think of ways to reduce our risk over time. And, I know it's very difficult because it is so complex, but you mentioned earlier on that there are ways that we could probably think about bolstering our brain capacity. I know I try to do lots of protein shakes as you do, Doctor. And as we age, I was reading in The Economist recently, lifting weights has now become much more prevalent. We've got GLP-1s that are giving us all kinds of fantastic side effects. I see you saying, oh, maybe not. So what can we do to stave off the dementia wolf?
So if there's one, I bought this book, The Blue Zones.
Yes. Which
is worth reading and investing in. I think it's a Netflix series as well.
Yes.
And this chap, Dan Buettner, went around the world asking, where do people live long? And not just live long, but don't have as much dementia, depression. And he found these zones around the world. So there's an island, I think Okinawa of Japan, Sicily, just off the boot of Italy. Interesting, in America, all places, in California, there's a zone. And he found these 5 zones. And he said, well, what are these people doing? It's not just genetics. And a lot of it is common sense, but I'll just briefly go through them. The number one factor is exercise, by a country mile. People who don't exercise don't live as long, have higher risks of dementia, depression, and nearly every health problem. So people have to move their bodies. They don't have to run and win the Comrades Marathon. They've got to move their bodies. And then we sort of half joke, without falling, without getting lost, without getting mugged. This is important. So safe walking, and it's literally 5 to 10 minutes a day, apparently up to 20 minutes a day. You're so spot on. There is good research that resistance training under supervision is so important as people age, not just exercising, but actually getting into a gym, or if you can't afford that, lifting some weights under supervision is important in effect. Then sleep is critical. There's more and more research now that if you have disrupted sleep because of tech and technology or whatever, stress, that's not good. You need at least 4 to 6 hours of deep REM sleep, in effect, cycles. Because that's when the brain clears the stress and the toxins and the day's residue, if you like, of overstimulation. And it's natural sleep, not sleep tablet-induced or alcohol-induced. And then all the common sense things of what's good for your heart are good for your brain. So to stay away from too much alcohol, smoking in effect, obesity, to manage that. GLP meds and that are the rage now. I'm not an expert on those. I just know intuitively that in life you can't cut too many corners and expect there's a side effect somewhere waiting.
Yeah.
If you're messing with insulin metabolism, you have to be careful. Let me just say it like that. For the right patient with morbid obesity, with diabetes and cardiovascular problems, absolutely. But for an otherwise fit person to be messing with the insulin metabolism might be looking for trouble later in life. I don't know. It's exercise, it's weight. It's getting out of your home, social stimulation, so important. It's celebrating your culture from a psychodynamic point of view.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Some way engaging with spirituality, not necessarily religion, but quietening the mind. Meditation is important. Prayer, if that's what helps you, that's fine. It's having a balance, and these are common sense things. And if I can just leave you with this, what's good is, Freud apparently said, for most people to be happy, you need three things: someone to love, to be loved, and something to do. Jung said that thing you do must have purpose. And Viktor Frankl said, in order to find your purpose, you have to suffer. That's a bit harder in life.
Yeah.
Meaning that life is not a bed of roses, that there will be crises you have to figure out. But through each one of those, if you find the right people to help you, it's possible to survive life and live longer. Meaning that it's important to invest in human relationships. It's important to make peace with the past. It's important not to hold on to grudges. And so we find that there is research, for example, that atheists struggle. I'm not having a go at atheists. I'm just specifically saying that people that don't have a belief system struggle. People who don't have family struggle. So there's a lot of healthy aging that's intuitive, but we don't do it because it's not sexy to think about our aging later in life. And a lot of mental health work is about that. Just briefly, there are medications to improve memory or slow down rates of decline. If for established Alzheimer's disease, there are meds like donepezil, memantine. These meds try and reduce the amyloid impact on the brain. We haven't really had time to speak about. They don't reverse dementia, but we have seen that they can slow them down if you get all of the things I've just said right.
Yeah.
So I think people need to be cautious of these experimental meds. There's one called lecanemab. It costs R500,000 a year. It dissolves amyloid plaques. But that can cause strokes and it's not always, there's no quick fix in this space.
Yeah, it reminds me so much of what Atul Gawande said in Being Mortal.
Yeah.
We often come at medicine or our health from a very Western-centric lens,
yes.
But we're complex beings, with drivers, desires, purpose comes into it, identity, as we've mentioned, and taking a pill or injecting yourself with something as a shortcut, certainly it doesn't sit well with me either, because it doesn't address the underlying human being. Exactly. And interesting that we see this rise of almost nihilistic atheism in the world. And again, I'm not judging, but we do have to have something anchoring us in life. Kim, just to give you the final word here, we've developed this podcast to talk about these life transitions. I think this is probably one of the most difficult to talk about as a family. So what are some techniques or tips or advice that you can give families on how to address this early on, to build that letter of wishes, to build that framework as early as possible to avoid this becoming such a fraught conversation later on?
I think it's having the discussion before it's in the room. So if we can, as a family, be open to talking about the what ifs, the unexpecteds that are going to come when they do come, we're not promoting them to come. It's the same when we do estate planning and we talk about one day when you're no longer going to be here. It would be the same as this conversation of saying, if it did happen, what would it look like? What would we be able to do? Because in that way, you're again giving everybody the permission to bring it up. Otherwise, it's going to be again pushed down, not brought up. And then what do? We end up with it when it's at that time when it's exploding, when everybody's emotional, nobody's making the right decisions, and then all of a sudden we've made a whole lot of decisions that were first of all not respectful to the person, because everything gets taken away from them and they just left. So I would encourage these conversations rather before, and anticipate them as part of the planning process. Let's call it risk planning.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Certainly not the end of this conversation. Dr. Fuller, would love to have you back on. There's so much that we didn't didn't get to talk about, but I think in the 30 minutes we did manage to have a very important conversation about dementia, the rising risks of it, the underlying causes, the impacts on our finances, and what we can do as individuals, as families, to try and prepare and do some risk planning, as you said, Kim, about the potential of dementia in later life. That was Dr. Ryan Fuller, specialist geriatric psychiatrist and founder of the Memory Care Group, and Kim Potgieter, as always, helping us understand dementia not just simply through the diagnostic lens, but as a profound life chapter, one where things like care and money and dignity and family dynamics all come into play. Have the conversation while it can still be a conversation. That's certainly the take home for me. Get the assessment, put the structures in place, protect the caregivers, and respect the individual at the end of the day. You've been listening to Life Chapters, Money Choices. Until next time, plan early and speak up.